Hey there, welcome back to the channel. My name is Reid and I'm a real estate agent in the Cochrane Alberta area. Now, if you've been considering moving to Alberta, moving to Calgary, but don't want to live in a city of 1.6 million people, or you're finding that Calgary is just a little bit too expensive to find a home that you like, and so you've started branching out to look at some of the surrounding communities, this is going to be a great video for you. I'm going to break down the differences between Airdrie, which is about 20 minutes north of Calgary, and Cochrane, which is about 25 minutes west of Calgary. Before we dive right into the video, I'd like to know, do you live in Airdrie? Do you live in Cochrane? Have you looked at these two places? And which one would you choose to live in before I touch into my summary? It'd be interesting to know what everyone else is thinking. So drop that in the comment section below, and then let's continue on with the video. Now, right off the bat, the two main differences between Cochrane and Airdrie is their size. Airdrie is sitting with a population of about 80,000 people, where Cochrane is only sitting at about 35 to 36,000 people. So right off the bat, Airdrie is twice the size of Cochrane, and that alone is going to change its dynamics quite a bit. And that major population difference is just going to really affect the overall vibe or feel of the lifestyle that you're going to gain from living in either of those two markets. Diving deeper into how that population can change how the town feels, Airdrie is going to be a little bit more spread out, with some of its services and stores and amenities being in multiple different locations throughout Airdrie. So you've got a shopping center up off of 567 Veterans at the north side, and you've got some more shopping down off Yankee Valley in the south portion of Airdrie. So getting things from different stores may take you a little bit longer, as you might have to drive 20 minutes to cross the town to get to a different store. Cochrane, being a smaller town, offers all of its main shopping and all of its main amenities in one centralized downtown location. So any of your shopping is done down across Center Avenue, allowing you to access all of Cochrane's major retailers all in one centralized hub. So that's going to be a little bit of a different feel. With the larger population though, Airdrie does have more restaurants, a few more local shops, and a few bigger retailers such as Home Depot, which may be beneficial to that DIYer or somebody in a construction business that runs their own contracting company. Both centers offer a recreation complex. Airdrie has Genesis Place, which is a big, large multi-use facility with indoor pools, ice skating rinks, and a recreation complex. Cochrane, being only half the size of Airdrie, still offers a similar service in the Spray Lakes Family Sawmill Center. So there is equal recreation opportunities in both centers. Another major difference between the two centers has to do with its weather patterns. So Cochrane, being in a valley, typically does see some very large thunderstorms in the summer months. However, being that it is in a valley, there is some pressure changes that happen, and being so close to the foothills, Cochrane does not see the same number of major hailstorms per year that Airdrie does. So living in portions of Airdrie can lead to a more common occurrence of hail throughout those summer months. Diving into some of the costs associated with living into the two places, which is going to be a big driver for a lot of people. Both of them are very affordable when it comes to the national average or even the Alberta average, with Airdrie sitting about 10% below the national and provincial average of cost of living, and Cochrane at 9% below the two. Their housing prices, again, mimic each other quite closely, with Airdrie being 42% below the national average and Cochrane being 41% below the national average. So Vancouver, Toronto, we're looking at you. It's much more affordable to live in either of these two towns in Alberta than it is in Vancouver or Toronto. Diving into that housing cost a little more, if we look at the actual statistics put out by the local real estate boards, it shows that Airdrie has a slight edge over Cochrane in affordability in its detached market. And usually that sits out about anywhere from $20,000 to $30,000 cheaper, as it shows, in Airdrie versus Cochrane. But what I wanted to do is dive into that a little bit further, because Airdrie does have a larger number of older homes on some bigger lots, but the homes are smaller, that do go for a lesser price, so it may skew those numbers a little bit. So in diving into it, I looked at homes in Bayside, Williamstown, Kings Heights, Windsong, and Ravenswood. These are all some bigger, more defined communities in Airdrie, and I thought that they'd be a good fit as they mimic some other communities here in Cochrane, which I'll touch on in a minute. Getting into some of the prices, if I look at an average price for a duplex home in those communities in Airdrie, you're looking at a price tag of about $525,000. In order to come up with that number, I looked at what is currently available on the market and some recently sold properties in order to get an idea of what properties have actually been selling for in Airdrie. Jumping into the detached home prices in Airdrie, you're looking at an average price of about $698,000. Now, being that I looked at some of the newer, more developed communities in Airdrie, those homes are going to be reflective of a 3 to 4 bedroom home on a normal street. Obviously, if we're looking at the properties that back onto a walkway, green space, or backing onto one of the Airdrie's many storm ponds, then it's obviously going to inflate that price. However, for the purpose of this, the mean price of a detached home in Airdrie is looking to be about $698,000. Jumping across to Cochrane, and this is where things kind of surprised me a little bit, in that for Cochrane, I looked at Greystone, Fireside, Heritage Hills, Sunset Ridge, Riversong, Rivercrest, and that area. So those are some of the more popular communities in Cochrane, and it's isolating those newer developed communities to compare across to Airdrie. A duplex price in Cochrane did edge out, being slightly more expensive than in Airdrie at about $530,000 in Cochrane. But the real shocker to me was that the detached home price in Cochrane was actually trending a little bit less at $694,000. So it seems to me that the discrepancy in the home prices are really coming into the older home market and not necessarily into the newer community market. So that's something to really keep in mind when you start shopping around for your prices. In terms of higher end homes, Airdrie does have a number of homes that back onto one of the many storm ponds or walkways or green spaces throughout the city. And a lot of those homes do crest over $1 million all the way up into about $1.4 million. Some of the more expensive areas in Airdrie would be Cooperstown, or some of the homes that directly back onto those storm ponds in, say, Kings Heights. Now, Cochrane does offer some more expensive homes, being the Ridge homes in Glen Eagles, some of the homes in Riviera backing onto the river, and some of the homes in Riversong that are up on the ridge looking over the entire Cochrane River Valley and having a fantastic view of the Rocky Mountains. So while you still have the option to get into a more estate style $1 million plus home in either town, I think the views in Cochrane, being that you'll back onto the Bow River or overlook the Cochrane River Valley and see a stunning view of the Rocky Mountains, slightly edges out the views given to you by backing onto a community storm pond with a pathway around it that Airdrie does offer. Now, diving into the recreation standpoint, I've talked about the 2 recreation complexes in the towns, but the one edge there that I would give would be to Cochrane, being that it is 20 to 30 minutes closer to the mountains, closer to Kananaskis, and closer to all that recreation. So for a buyer or family that really values being close to the West Country and close to the mountains of Banff, Canmore, Lake Louise, or into Kananaskis for a bunch of recreation in the summer and the wintertime, that extra half an hour each way will really add up over the course of a year and might be something that's very important to you when you're looking for where you want to settle down and buy a place. Now, when it comes down to commute, the 2 towns are very similar. And I say towns loosely because obviously Airdrie is a city, but both of them have to commute via a major highway into Calgary if that is where you work. Airdrie has a slight edge in that there's probably more job availability in Airdrie just due to the larger number of businesses. However, you do have to commute into Calgary via Deerfoot and Highway 2, which is a more highly trafficked highway than Highway 1A coming out of Cochrane into Calgary. So you'll get higher truck traffic coming in from Airdrie, and Airdrie is not without its construction challenges, no different than Cochrane. Cochrane's is on the west-hand side, affecting, a few communities, whereas Airdrie, there's an interchange being built just south of Kings Heights along Highway 2, which will affect everybody coming out of Airdrie commuting into Calgary for the next year. Finally, the last thing I want to touch on is safety. How safe are these 2 communities? Now, in that sense, the edge is going to go to Cochrane. For this comparison, I used the crime severity index put out by Stats Canada, and using an national average of about 85 as the crime severity index, Cochrane trends at lower than the national average at only 78. Airdrie, on the other hand, is trending much higher than the national average at 127. So you're seeing a much lower level of crime in Cochrane, and I think a lot of that has to do with half the population size. However, those numbers are based on a crime amount per 100,000 residents, so they are quite comparable. Now, there is a slight difference in what types of crime occur in the two places. Cochrane does have a slightly higher violent crime rate than Airdrie. However, the property crime rate is significantly higher in Airdrie than Cochrane. So that's just something to keep in mind when you're choosing a place, whether you want to retire, invest in, and rent out in, or move a family to. I think the crime numbers and whether or not the community feels safe is going to be a very big factor when looking for a new home. If you have any questions about Cochrane or Airdrie, I did live in Airdrie for 5 years. And as always, I'm just here to try and help, provide some information, and help you navigate your next home buying or selling journey a little bit easier. Thanks, and I'll see you in the next one.